a tutte e a tutti. Questo è il primo grande incontro del Salone del Libro di Torino che è appena incominciato. Questa è la lezione inaugurale. Tutti gli anni la affidiamo a un grande scrittore, a una grande scrittrice. Quest'anno, come sapete, il tema è il mondo salvato dai ragazzini. E questa grande scrittrice che sono onorata di annunciare e di presentarvi, una scrittrice che sa guardare il mondo con occhi vivissimi e acuti, ha scelto di dedicarsi proprio all'adolescenza, a questo speciale momento dell'esistenza. E quindi è con grande gratitudine e emozione che chiamo sul palco Zadie Smith.
Esattamente, è una riflessione, è un saggio, si chiama The Fall, leggo in inglese e grazie a tutti. Ok, The Fall. I've been thinking about teenagers. I have one myself now, and of course I was one once, in a different world, at a different moment. And can remember the feeling. Everything was extremity. It still is. 4 waves of feminism, digital connectivity, a global wellness movement, the injunction to be kind, the commonplace, it gets better. None of it seems to have put much of a dent in teenage misery, especially not of the kind that concerns me. Watching girls gather outside the multiplexes a few summers ago, choosing between Barbie and Oppenheimer, I thought, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Brittle, impossible perfection on the one hand, apocalypse on the other. I've never forgotten the years I spent stretched between those two poles. And there was a time when I believe the intensity of my girlhood memories made me somewhat unusual. Even that they were what had made me a writer. I was disabused of that notion a long time ago, during the early days of the social networks. Friends reunited, Facebook. Turns out there's a whole lot of people in this world who feel they never lived as intensely as they did that summer. If teenage me could see me now, she'd be so disgusted. I said that to a shrink a few years ago, to which the shrink replied, "Why assume your 15-year-old self to be the arbiter of all truth?" Well, it's a good point. But it hasn't stopped me from carrying her around on my shoulder. I don't suppose at this point I'll ever be rid of her. Well, many interesting things have happened to adult me. But in the opinion of teenage me, there is only one real event in our lives. And it occurred on the 16th of April, 1993, when I fell 40 feet from my bedroom window. I need to give backstory. Teenage me was obsessed with backstory. Prior to the fall, I'd spent a couple of years periodically writing lengthy orations to be read out at my own funeral. By who? My brothers? The purpose of these speeches was to explain to the gathered mourners exactly why teenage me had decided to leave this world, and who precisely should feel guilty about her death, and indeed directly culpable for it. I find it odd now that this Gothic tendency should have existed so independently from any intention to end my actual life. Never for a moment did I research or consider any mode of suicide. I could very easily write a funeral oration in the morning and then try to secure an audition for Annie in the afternoon. Teenage me wanted to be the first black Annie. She didn't understand that Annie is at most 12. But I was still very enamoured of this funeral scenario. Skinny bitches with straight hair and straight teeth would hang their silky heads and weep with shame. People with parents who could afford contact lenses or even just non-NHS spectacles would cower before my working-class posthumous righteousness. The sadistic French teacher who wouldn't let me keep my puffer jacket on in class would be forced to admit in front of everybody that being from Senegal was an unfair linguistic advantage that she had over all her pupils, especially me. Comment dit-on l'amour? And Sasha would take back what she'd said about half-caste, and the popular girls would notice my wit and inner beauty and want to hang, and my best friend would realise he was in love with me, and it would all be too late. Too late. Some of this teenage energy I smuggled into white teeth. But whereas in a novel it was pitched as comedy, in real life it was ponderously self-serious and exhausting to be around. I've been banging essentially the same drum since I was 11. I'm deep, you're shallow. You're rich, I'm poor. I'm clever, you're beautiful. You're popular, I'm interesting. And so on. Now I was 17, yet still spending an astounding amount of time accusing other people of preoccupations that in truth filled my every waking hour. Who in the final analysis was more obsessed with Eleanor's silky swinging bangs? Eleanor or me? What about the way Kelly's fully Caribbean booty looked in patched jeans? My own backside, flat as a pancake, I considered a cursed inheritance from my father's sisters. In truth, my preoccupation with other people's luck and beauty had long ago turned ugly. My cleverness had curdled into bitterness. None of it was remotely interesting. And now, on the 16th of April, in the middle of the Easter break, I had decided to use my mother's bedroom phone to call my best friend and burden him once again with the knowledge that I loved him and that the fact he didn't like me that way was ruining my life and might well result in him having to listen to a very long funeral oration delivered possibly by my brothers or maybe Keanu Reeves, depending on who was available. But because I'd served a version of this ultimatum to my best friend once or twice a year since we'd met in year 7, he took my histrionics with great patience, but few words. Meanwhile, at the other end of the winding phone cord, I was dry heaving and messy crying, hoping he would hear the hidden message in Prince's Love to the Nines, it's not so hidden, which I'd left on full volume back in my bedroom. Somehow or other he got me off the phone. I trudged back to my room, got myself up onto the windowsill with a box of silk cut I had stolen from my mother. Let Prince's 7 wash over me, and in an orgy of self-pity, wept loudly, drew out a cigarette, and prepared to light up. Backstory. I lived in a world of pure Prince then, and also in a filthy pit of my own creation. Sometimes when I'm ranting at my own children about the state of their rooms, I suddenly remember what I used to think whenever my mother came in and tried to complain over the blaring sounds of Prince's sexy motherfucker, about the bowls of old food stored under my bed, and the cigarette butts put out in the old bowls of food, and the candles I liked to burn and melt into the damp carpet. Sometimes if I got bored of a glass of water, I would just pour its remnants out onto the floor. Yes, when my mother was making her case against me, this is what teenage me was thinking. You poor woman. If only you had a life of your own. What a pitiful existence is yours. If the only thing you can think to do all day is worry about this petty ephemera. Teenage me was reading the dictionary. She could be standing right in front of me, perhaps holding a brie sandwich with 5 cigarettes put out in it, having just come back from a long day as a social worker, dealing with the kinds of children who did not get brie to put in their sandwiches and could not scream, "Get out of my room!" for they shared that room with their family, would look at this single-parent, hard-working immigrant mother of mine and think, Jesus Christ, woman, get a life. Every now and then, though, I took genuine pity on her. Genuine pity meant not changing any of my behaviours, but just lying and saying that I had. This particular April, I'd sworn to her I wasn't smoking, therefore stolen cigarette, therefore windowsill. I'm unsure what the etiquette these days is around mentioning one's own weight at any point in a narrative, but a crucial part of this backstory is that teenage me was thick and allergic to exercise, which made getting onto the windowsill in the first place somewhat of a challenge. I imagine a nimbler person might have sat with both legs facing forward on the slope of the roof with an arm holding the window frame. But once one leg was out, I couldn't be bothered with the other, so instead sat astride the half-rotten beam and, overconfident as ever, used both hands to get the fag out of the box and into my mouth. All seven and we'll watch them fall. They stand in the way of love and we will smoke them all. Then I just slipped. Or maybe the woodworm's windowsill gave out, I don't know. But in a split second I'd flipped entirely over. Now I was gripping the ledge by my fingertips, hanging as if off a cliff, just as they do in the movies. How long does Cary Grant hang off Mount Rushmore in North by Northwest? It feels like an improbably long time. In northwest London, it wasn't much longer than 3 or 4 seconds. And yet, time dilated or expanded or something. I found out how much of infinity is in a second. A teenage epiphany. I even had time to think, this is a teenage epiphany. And also, this is like that moment in Ferris Bueller when the Sirac becomes lots of individual dots of colour, and inside each dot are more dots. I swear to God, I thought that. And I was so calm. Teenage me, who was as paralysed and terrified by death as adult me remains, became somehow in that moment blissfully calm. I was 17. I'd loved books and movies and paintings and the entire life's work of the tiny man I now reverently called Symbol. I had loved my neighbourhood, and Keats and Whitney Houston and my school, and my friends and my brothers and Tracy Chapman and Smokey. And I now realised even the experience of being in unrequited love for 6 years. This being a teenage epiphany, I didn't think of my parents for even 1 millisecond. And now it was all like over. Nothing can stand in the way of love, I realised. The sky is blue, it's a beautiful day, let go. Adult me likes to think of my work over the years as an ever-changing, living, growing thing. Teenage me, not so much. She says, all you are ever saying in your work, I roll, is the same 2 things I was saying on the 16th of April. A, time is not what we think it is, and B, neither is volition. I landed sitting up in our downstairs neighbour's half of the garden. Apparently my middle brother saw something large go past the living room window, but didn't immediately realise it was me. One of the things other teens bragged me about back then was my size, but the joke turned out to be on them because, according to the doctor who later operated on me, it was my big bum that saved my life, i.e. my flat and yet substantial arse. I don't know if that can really be medically accurate, but this is apparently how doctors spoke to young women in the early 90s. Oh, but didn't I feel like a superhero? I'd fallen 40 feet and survived. I can even remember believing for an ecstatic second that for my next trip, I would just stand up and walk away. Then came pain. Our neighbour, a Pakistani woman with not very much English, suddenly appeared by my side, having spotted me through the huge gap in the fence, which both her family and ours refused to pay to fix. She was very panicked, and I was very calm, but we couldn't really understand each other, and after a while I just lay back and looked at the sky. She must have called an ambulance though, because one seemed to arrive almost instantaneously. Time is not what we think it is. And they gassed me with something that made the whole world go orange. For the purposes of the story, I wish it were purple, but it was orange. What a wonderful drug that was. I had by that point in life taken my fair share of consciousness-altering substances, and as a young critic in training, decided on the spot to give this one, whatever it was, a solid 4 stars. By that time, my mother was by my side, and I thought it was because I was so high that I couldn't precisely answer the question, what happened? 30 years later, I'm no closer to answering it. Why did I let go? Did I want to? I was sad. Moments earlier, I was terribly sad. But then I was so happy. So did I fall or did I jump? Was it an accident? A subconscious choice? A decision? All of the above? What do people mean when they say they chose something, or that they wanted to do something and willed it to happen? I get that willing and wanting things in a sequence is how we make and tell a story. But not everything is a story. And how do we know when we really want something or really will it? What the hell is volition anyway? I don't always remember that the thing about Holden Caulfield is that he's trying to stop kids from falling from a great height. He says, I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff, and what I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. On the other side of the precipice, presumably, is the adult world of phonies who all seem to know everything and have a common sense answer for all your existential questions. Time? Well, that's what you'll find on the goddamn clock. Just remember to put it forward an hour in the autumn. Volition? Jesus Christ, woman, give me a break. You wanted to do something and you did it. End of story. There is something so adolescent in writers. They will keep asking childish questions. Is that a good thing? I did really love Salinger as a teen, but as an adult, rereading him, I'm sad to report I have a different reaction. It's one thing to keep asking childish questions, another to permanently retreat into the fields of rye. For me, the whole point is to keep putting our childish questions to the calcified adult world, just in case they can change anything down there on the other side of the cliff. To that end, I got very lucky after my own fall, because the ambulance took me straight from the world of abstract adolescent angst to the bricks and mortar reality of Middlesex Hospital during the glory days of the NHS. There I discovered that time, besides being an existential question, can also be a practical quantity that human beings willingly agree to expend upon other human beings in order to put metal pins into shattered femurs and lift flat arses to place bedpans underneath them. I learned that there was really such a thing as a vocation, and that some people willed theirs into being, not just by studying medicine and practicing it, but also by sitting at bedsides and joking with relatives. I discovered the different levels of volition that can exist on a national scale in order to build a public healthcare system funded by the taxpayer, that motley collection of willing and unwilling participants, which would then result in a group of medical professionals spending the better part of 2 years ensuring a broke-ass teenager with a bad attitude walked again, without any money directly passing hands between us. But that's another story. Because I was too lazy to do my rehabilitation exercises, I was on crutches for the longest time. I did my A-levels on crutches. A sympathetic teacher drove me in and out of school for 6 months because my mum had to work. My peers, meanwhile, were notably less sympathetic. I'd always wanted to create an aura of mystery and fascination around me, but what I got instead was awkward pity and embarrassed silence. No one dared ask me if I'd tried to kill myself, not even my own family. And though I told anybody who asked that I'd fallen out of my bedroom window smoking a fag, I don't think anyone really bought that either. It didn't make sense as a story, so it just sort of sat there, lumpingly, as a fact about me, albeit a fact which fitted pretty neatly with the rest of my reputation as a petulant klutz who was always doing something off-key and faintly ridiculous. It made a certain kind of narrative sense that the buck-toothed brown girl who thought it was cute to wear one red shoe and one white who frequently got caught pretending to have watched films she'd never seen, and who once played a rabbi in a self-written play about the Holocaust, would be the same schnook who fell 40 foot out of her own home. It was all peak Zadie, or Zadie, as I've recently begun to insist on being called. The fall brought me no kudos and no respect, but it did cure me of the habit of writing funeral speeches. I'd run right through the ride to the cliff's edge and looked over, and in the process discovered a newfound appreciation for riding. I took my teenage misery back to my fetid armchair, opened the book, retreated. Sometimes I ask myself, what would teenage me do with her misery now? Where can a 21st century girl even go these days to retreat from reality? If the answer, the internet, comes to mind, I'm guessing you're either over 50 or else somehow still able to imagine the internet as separate from reality. I worry that the avenues of escape have narrowed. Whatever else I used to think about, time, for example, the one thing I never had to think about was whether or not there'd be enough of it, existentially speaking. But now the end of time itself, apocalypse, has become for the average teenager an entirely familiar and domesticated concept. I don't remember taking Y2K seriously, but I'd better be a 2038 truther now. And to whom would my funeral orations be directed? My realm of potential envy would no longer be limited to just the people in my school or neighborhood. Now it would stretch to as many people as my phone could conjure, that is, to all the people in the world. I'd like to think Prince would still be mediating my reality to some degree, but I know he would be infinitely tinier than he was before, reduced to a speck in an epic web of digital mediation so huge and complex as to seem almost cosmic. I imagine I'd be having a very hard time deciding if what I really willed was what I appeared to be willing. Do I honestly love my lengthy skincare regime? Do I truly want to queue all night to purchase the latest iteration of my device? How much do I actually want to watch Barbie? Or has some unseen commercial entity decided all that for me? I don't think teenage misery is so very different than it used to be. But I do think its scope of operation is so much larger, and the space for respite vanishingly small. But I would think that. I'm 50. It really is far too easy these days for adults to fall into a teenage pivot despond when considering the current existence of teenagers. But I try to remind myself, despite all the obvious transformations, two of my favorite intimate self-cures continue to be readily available. People and books. Being with people, reading books. Every now and then, middle-aged mothers barge into teenagers' rooms without knocking and try to recommend both. We all know how that goes. Time collapses. You wish you hadn't done it. Then why did you do it? What a pitiful existence is yours if the only thing you can think to do all day is worry about this petty ephemera. Thank you.
A sinistra c'è il banchetto dove acquistarlo e farvelo firmare. Grazie ancora per il